Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And it's great pleasure to have our favorite guy, Joseph P. Farrell, with us. And he has a website, GizaDeathStar.com. There is a PayPal button on Joseph's website, and I would like to make a report that it is being worked out. So please work out his PayPal button. Hi, Joseph.
Hi, Georgianne. Thanks for having me back. Thanks for that, and thanks to that dear lady. She knows who she is, and the gentleman, and all the other people that have been praying and sending donations and sending articles and all of that. It's truly appreciated. So, and help Georgianne out too, folks, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, hon.
Okay. We're going to talk about...
we're going to talk about something I know. This was your idea, so as usual, I have not a clue.
Oh, boy. We're going to talk about another cosmic war.
Oh, boy.
And Joseph...
Okay. Okay.
Boy, you're sure setting the stage.
Well, so are you.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Given the level of technology, like planet busting, moving planets around, all that kind of stuff that they had before the Bible was written,
right?
You know, long before. How would that technology stack up with what we may have today?
Oh, boy. That's anybody's guess, but...
well, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to get to my guessing here. The technology that we appear to be looking at now... Let's take the Cassini photographs of Saturn's moon Iapetus. More recently, there was an article that was released by some scientist. I think it was on phys.org. It may have been one of NASA's websites. I don't recall which. That indicated one of the moons of Jupiter. I think maybe it was Ganymede. Again, my memory is foggy, so don't hold me to that. But it was one of the moons of Jupiter, I believe, that they said was layered. There was, and I think I mentioned this on an earlier conversation that we had, that was regolith and then ocean, and beneath that more regolith, and then beneath that more ocean, and then layers of solid and then water, and then solid and water, and so on. And when I read that, the first thing that popped into my mind was, well, that's a good insulator. Depending on what kind of moderator, you could conceivably, going way out on a limb, make it kind of a heavy water reactor to interact with cosmic rays and so on.
To do what?
Propulsion, energy supplies, heat, warmth, things like that. So So in other words, stacking it all up, looking at some of these photographs, Iapetus in particular, we appear to be looking at artifacts that were either natural objects that were subsequently terraformed on a planetary scale, or just looking at artificial objects, period, that were constructed that way. And if that's the case, we're looking at huge mega engineering.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, do they have a capability like that today? And my argument, my response has been, in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations, I tried to make the argument. I don't know if I made it clearly. Sometimes I tend to get lost in the details, and my chain of reasoning doesn't become clear or apparent to people. But what I was trying to argue was, let's assume that this national security establishment after World War II began to find evidence of these things much earlier than they let on to the public. or even if they didn't, we don't really even need to assume that. Even if they didn't, the fact that they've discovered such things would provoke in them the response that, well, somehow we have to convince whoever may have built these things, if they're still around, that we have a similar capability. So in other words, you have to make a demonstration that you have a technology that's able to engineer systems on planetary or even stellar scales. All right?
Oh, wow.
In other words, you have to play a game of bluff. You're playing a game of bluff poker, quite literally.
Yeah.
Because in a certain sense, we are not at a Class 1 or Class 2 stage level in our civilization yet.
No, far from it.
Kardashev's classification system, the basic outline is, again, to refresh people's memory, Dr. Kardashev in Russia came up with a scheme of classifying extraterrestrial civilizations based on their energy requirements and their ability to engineer systems at a planetary, that's a Class 1 civilization, or a stellar, that's a Class 2 civilization.
Yeah.
Or a galactic, and that's a Class 3 civilization, which is far beyond our imagination. But long ago, I pointed out that if you look at the Great Pyramid, this was an observation I made in the very first book I wrote in this alternative stream of thinking, in the Giza Death Star. I wrote that if you look at the Great Pyramid, it appears to be constructed as a machine, number one.
Yeah.
And that this machine, if you study carefully, its dimensional analogs of the geometries of local celestial space, it appears not only to incorporate local planetary and therefore Class 1 types of analogs, it appears to incorporate stellar analogs of our Sun, so therefore Class 2 type civilizations, but it even has dimensional analogs of certain properties of the galaxy. So, if it's a machine, it's operating on all three levels. And that kind of boggles the mind to stop and think about.
Yeah.
So, I made the argument in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations that if they're thinking anywhere close to the type of kind of long extended chain of reasoning I've been making in all these books, that they are going to want to convince whoever that may still be out there that we have a capability of doing things on planetary, if not stellar scales. And in point of fact, we do have a technology that, with the ionospheric heating technology that is typified in HARP and ISCAT and all these things, that is capable of moving weather systems, and of course weather systems, whether we like it or not, those are planetary scaled phenomena. They're all interlinked with each other on a planetary scale.
Right.
So the idea of manipulating continental weather systems implies an ability to manipulate and engineer planetary physics, and that's exactly what the claim was for HARP, that they were able to heat and raise a certain portion of the entire ionosphere of the planet. Well, stop and think what this means, people. The ionosphere is part of the magnetosphere of the Earth that protects the Earth from harmful radiation from outer space, and particularly our sun. So in other words, by manipulating the ionosphere, you're manipulating a planetarily scaled system. You're also manipulating a system that if you go into recent papers and ideas on planetary physics, on geophysics, they will also tell you that the Earth's magnetic field seems to be somehow mysteriously coupled with that of the Sun.
Yeah.
So in other words, by manipulating the Earth's magnetosphere, it could have resonance effects on our star, our nearing star. So, that implies an engineering capability, whether we like it or not, that, we might be able to leverage effects on the Sun.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, oh, boy. Now, and I will readily grant you, Georgianne, that there are scientists out there that would rightly point out that to do that would require either a phenomenal body of knowledge on resonance effects, coupling effects with the sun that are not public knowledge, or it would require a phenomenal amount of energy that we simply don't have.
Right.
So, if that were to happen, it would have to be the first case. It would have to be manipulation via resonance effects, and those, what we know about them in the public may not be sufficient to do what I suggest, but that would be conceptually the way that you would go about playing that game of blind man's bluff, that game of bluff poker. And I think that's precisely the argument I made in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations. I think that's what they've done. I think they've created these systems in part out of what they have perceived as a national security imminent, potential threat, and out of concerns for planetary security, that they've created these systems as rudimentary ways of convincing whoever may be out there, or in interdimensional space, or spiritual beings, or what have you, that we're capable of a very rudimentary effect on these kinds of scales. So tread carefully.
Well, good grief, Joseph, they would have to have some knowledge of somebody out there in order.
Well, I think they do.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I argued in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations, and in the previous book, Breakaway Civilizations, was that if you're looking at the UFO phenomenon as it begins to really take off during World War II and then continues on into the nuclear age, And here, again, Richard Dolan, I think, is absolutely right on the head of the nail here, that this would have constituted the big national security issue at the deepest level, much more so than dealing with the communist bloc. This was the issue. Mm-hmm. And, my argument has been, well, if that's the case, and I think that his argument here is sound, if that's the case, then they're going to want to examine every possible relevant data set that they can to formulate their policy. And one of those data sets is going to be a careful examination of monuments, ancient texts, reportages of incidents from classical times on through the Middle Ages and up to our own, of anything that could be considered a UFO encounter or a UFO witness scene. They're going to examine all of that and assess it. Come up with their top secret assessments. And I think this is what has been done, because it's very interesting. In the last couple of weeks, NASA has released an e-book, interestingly enough, all about ancient monuments and ancient astronaut theory.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, oh, my goodness, and I pointed this out on a blog either this week or last week. I don't know if I can never remember what I've written. And I pointed out, well, if this is the case, then it's very interesting what has happened. 30 years ago, ancient astronaut theory was fringe, and you never would have encountered anything seriously being written about the subject from NASA or sponsored by it. And the fact that they're doing so now is a huge indicator of how dramatically the culture has changed.
Oh, yeah.
And it's also an admission that flawed as the work of an analysis of people like Erich von Däniken and other people that wrote in that sphere were, the basic concepts that they were talking about were the possibilities that the national security establishment had to consider. Mm-hmm. And now the cat's being let out of the bag. They're telling us, yeah, we have considered it, and here's our thoughts that we're willing to disclose to the public.
Even the Vatican is on board.
Even the Vatican, exactly.
Yeah.
And, the Vatican raises another interesting problem, and I was getting ready to write a paper about this. Everyone is talking about baptism, but, and that's the context in which the Pope's remarks were made. But people are forgetting something. In Roman Catholic teaching, as in most mainline Protestant teaching, certainly in the Orthodox Church, baptism is the entry sacrament. In other words, you can't partake of any of the other sacraments until you've been baptized.
Yeah.
But once you've been baptized, the the way is open to you to a participation in all other sacraments, including, if you're really thinking carefully here, including holy orders.
Yeah.
Ordination.
Yeah.
So, the implications here with Francis saying, "Yeah, we'd baptize aliens." Well, okay, Francis, would you ordain them to the Catholic priesthood?
Oh boy.
Would you then go on to consecrate them, to be bishops? And if that were the case, would you admit them to the College of Cardinals? So, once you've opened up that door, it goes all the way. But the technology, what I'm getting at here is, people have been asking, well, where's the evidence for all this high technology? Well, part of the evidence is right there in things like HAARP and so on and so forth. But once you start poking around in other areas like ion propulsion, fusion drives, and so on and so forth, which they've also been talking about, and which I pointed out in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations, the Brookings Report, which NASA sponsored way back in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. The Brookings Report itself, which was all about what would be the consequences of the space program, and everybody, this is as I pointed out in the book, this is a 200-page report. It's a 200-page document. Mm-hmm. And the one passage in the document that the alternative ufology community always focuses on is that one passage having to deal with potential contact with extraterrestrials or evidence of an ancient extraterrestrial interplanetary civilization. Okay?
Yeah.
And, everyone points out that the Brookings Report says that, well, if that happened, the best course of action would be to suppress the evidence because in the past, in human experience, when a superior civilization has contacted an inferior civilization, it's always been to the detriment of the inferior one, all right?
Yeah.
And that's the passage that everyone points at in the Brookings Report. What they don't understand is that the Brookings Report primarily is concerned with the effects of advanced technology, be it what we develop or what extraterrestrials develop.
Yeah.
And when you read the report, it mentions explicitly, this is what I find so very interesting, that people have not latched on to. In that report, which was commissioned in the 1950s, it mentions very explicitly magnetohydrodynamic drive.
Oh
okay,
my goodness.
that's the expression it uses. Now, that's a fancy way of saying anti-gravity.
Oh.
It's a fancy way of saying electrogravitics. It's a fancy way of saying field propulsion. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's what it is. And for them, and what they go on in the context that they mention that, to state that significant work has already been achieved in the field.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Oh, wow. Now, you have to understand, this is right at the same time period that anti-gravity, as Nick Cook pointed out in his book, The Hunt for Zero Point, that anti-gravity disappeared off of the popular literature.
Yeah.
It went deeply black, in other words. It wasn't a subject you were allowed to talk about anymore. Mm-hmm. So, let's look at the consequence. This is something we said when we first started talking about the bell many years ago. When you make a claim, and this is the true significance of the bell story, and I hope that people really, again, pick up on this. If you make a claim that you are able to achieve some locally engineered effect on the fabric of space-time, even if it's minuscule, the mere ability to do this with any technology opens up the potential that you would have an energy source able to draw directly on, so to speak, the environment.
Yeah.
And you would have an energy source that, if weaponized, again, potentially, would make a hydrogen bomb look like a firecracker.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
So the plain fact of the matter is the concepts were being talked about in the 1930s. This is just, there's no way of ignoring this. It's clear, it's there. You can stamp your feet and throw equations on the blackboard and say, but that's impossible. But the plain fact of the matter is, there were serious people talking about all of this in the 1930s.
Oh.
Okay? Yeah, oh-ho. And in my opinion, the Nazis intended to do something about it. You know?
Oh, well, sure.
And I think they did. But my point here is if you've been developing that capability over time and with lots of money, then that opens up yet another possibility. If you're able to engineer that kind of energy source, then by dint of the fact that you can tap into that kind of energy, in turn, that means you're able to engineer on a gigantic scale.
Yeah.
You're able to construct things on a scale that would boggle most people's imagination.
Oh, boy.
Most people think these great big triangles flying around in the sky that everybody's seen, because they're so huge, couldn't possibly be human. And my point here is that size, there's no logical connection between size and extraterrestrial.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
The real problem is there a suggestion in our known terrestrial physics that these types of things are possible? Well, yeah, there is, unfortunately. So the other problem here then is could we be looking at a physics and capability that has returned us to what is written about in ancient times? That's really the point of your question. And
yeah.
The point of my answer is potentially yes, that's exactly what we're looking at.
Well, the scientists that are on the inside today, I'm sure, do not use the same set of physics that the universities use.
No, we've talked about that many times. You go to a typical electrodynamics class in college, and the set of equations that you learn as Maxwell's equations aren't Maxwell's equations at all. They're Oliver Heaviside's equations. And you add to this statements of people like Ben Rich that worked for Lockheed, that when you interviewed Michael Schratt, I believe he talked about when you interviewed him.
Yes.
That that Ben Rich came right out and said, is reported to have said that we found an error in the equations.
Oh.
And now we can take E.T. home. That's exactly what he said. I mean, I'm not overstating it at all. That's exactly what he said. Well, an error in what equations? Whose equations?
Certainly not the ones they're teaching in school.
Well, that's my point.
Yeah.
They would be the ones they're teaching in school, and he's suggesting that there's a hidden presupposition in those equations that they're teaching in school that they discovered, and that they started operating with a completely different paradigm, and hence rewrote the equation. I think that's what he's suggesting. And
wow.
If he's not making his statements for the purpose of a covert psychological operation to convince people we've got stuff that we really don't have, which I don't think he would be doing. That's too risky of a strategy. In other words, at some point, when you're playing bluff poker, at some point you have to have a high hand.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to show it, because the bluff doesn't work if you don't.
Oh boy.
So, again, we're back to square one. Do they have much more advanced technologies than I think they're letting on? Yeah, I do. I really do.
Yeah.
And there's been interesting confirmation of this in many ways from different sources. One of the best is Dr. Paul Laviolette, who wrote a book called Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. It's a very technical book. I mean, it's full of lots of mathematics, but it's very informative. And he points out that one of his sources told him, they've had defensive space probes out to the outer planets in the solar system for a long time.
Good grief.
Yeah. And when pressed, well, why do you have defensive space probes out there? Well, it's to keep an eye on whoever is out there and showing up here. So in other words, forget about the due early missile warning line, with Russian missiles up in the Arctic Circle. What you're being told may exist, if Laviolette's source is correct, is that there's a solar system due line.
Oh boy.
Yeah, oh boy.
Oh my gosh, Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously, at some point, they showed up here, and we called them God.
Yeah.
How did that play out? And the creation, did they terraform this planet? I mean...
Oh, boy. Oh, that's a good one. There is a school of thought out there that relies on a little-known theological problem called the gap theory, all right?
Yeah.
When you compare, I believe it's the book of Jeremiah, one of the chapters in Jeremiah, with the Genesis creation account, it appears like there was a second creation at some point, that the first one ran awry. And that it had to be redone. That's the gap theory. In a nutshell, it's a lot more complicated. But
is the second creation theory deal with Adam and all that, or is...
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I haven't taken any position on it, one way or the other. For me, it's an open question.
Yeah.
But stop and think. If you have a mega engineering capability, if you're able to blow up planets, you're able to engineer them. In other words, the terraforming, by the nature of the case, you're in possession of the physics and technology and the biological science and environmental science that allows you to do things on an enormous scale. And quite frankly, even that technology exists in rudimentary form already in humanity's hands, because they're talking about doing this with Mars.
Yeah.
So again, could these ancient gods have been considered gods by dint of their technology? Well, yeah, that's precisely my argument, is that they were considered gods because of their huge stature and because of their technological prowess. And if you don't have the scientific, even if you did have the scientific technology, let's stop and consider. Let's do an experiment.
Okay.
Suppose, God forbid, that we blew ourselves up in an all-out thermonuclear war, all right?
Yeah.
And that humanity survived and dug up, let's say, in the 24th century, dug up an early 21st century physics text full of mathematics and talk about light being particles and waves and talking about ion propulsion and all of this stuff. Well, what would you make of that? What would you make of this mysterious language? Well, this is the magical language of the gods.
Yeah.
I think you're looking at, I've always thought this, I don't care what academics say about it, when I look at some of these ancient texts, like the Epic of Ninurta, where you've got that long Sears catalog inventory of the tablets of destinies, and all of these gibberish names, I think that's what you're looking at. I think you're looking at a technical language that no one understood at the time. And they simply repeated it and passed it down. They didn't know what they were handing down, but here it is, folks. We've got these strange stones, and Ninurta is destroying some and can't destroy others, and it's hiding some. And Well, I've said many times, and in this series in the Cosmic War, I've said many times, it looks to me like we're reading an inventory. We're reading a report. We're not reading a mythology.
Right.
And we're reading a report of a victorious power in a war, taking inventory of the defeated's technology and saying, well, we can use this, so let's use this. We can't use that, so let's destroy it. And this stuff that is so horrendously powerful that we can't destroy, let's hide it. And make sure no one else can use it. And here's where the rubber meets the road. I suggested in the Cosmic War, if you'll recall, that I think those things that were hidden, that the most likely places for them to be hidden were in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and if they still had an interplanetary capability, the Moon or Mars.
Yeah.
And what do we see happening now in the public literature? Well, there's discussion of sending all of our ancient texts and archiving them on the Moon.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There is. This is coming out of Israel.
Well,
there's a project in Israel that they want to take, they want to come up with the text of the Torah and be able to create radiation shielding and everything and plop a copy on the moon. And once that idea got out, well, why stop at the Torah? Let's make it the Quran and the Vedic texts and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, what that sounds like, quite frankly, is they know what I've been writing about for a long time, and they're just kind of letting the cat out of the bag. I've been suspicious that all of these space probes have been for the purpose of looking for things. I'm squarely with Richard Hoagland on that one. I have strongly suspected that they're looking for things that they think may be on those planets.
Wow.
Well, the only way that you can suspect that things are on those planets is to be reading some of the same ancient texts and reading them in more or less the same way that I'm reading them and coming to more or less the same conclusions.
Absolutely. Wow.
So in other words, they're looking for technology.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for that stuff.
Whoa.
Yeah, oof.
Oh my gosh. Well,
yeah, they're looking for it.
Wow. Well, we've said before, and I have stated that I think that we've got a colony of some kind on Mars and probably also on the moon, and have had for some time.
That could be. I don't exclude the possibility, even though there's no
proof.
There's no proof, there's no solid evidence, but again, if you open up the speculative possibility of the technologies that we've been talking about, then you have to admit the possibility then, well, they may have achieved some breakthrough that they haven't disclosed, and that breakthrough would give them the capability to maintain a permanent colony, a permanent presence on those planets. There was, I think you've mentioned this, way back when Art Bell was doing his show, a fellow called in and said, well, we've had the technology to get to the moon and back before lunch.
No, that wasn't a caller. That was somebody.
That was a guest?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then, if that's the case, if that's true,
and that was years
ago. That was years ago, and they've been leaking the fact that they've been doing things with some of this technology for some time. For example, there was a NASA probe that was planned to go to an asteroid. I don't recall off the top of my head whether or not they really sent this. It was called the Dawn probe. That was a probe that was being sent to an asteroid. Well, part of the propulsion system on this probe was an ion propulsion drive.
Yeah.
Well, ion propulsion, that's another one of those kind of exotic. It's not really that exotic, but it sounds exotic to the public mind. And it's an open admission that, they've had this technology and they've admitted to planning to use it, and in my opinion probably have. And that's a very simple technology compared to some of this other stuff that we've been talking about. So, I don't exclude the possibility at all that there is a group of people on this planet that have extraordinarily sophisticated capabilities. The biggest problem that they've had, in my opinion, is the manufacturing of it, because I think it's so horrendously expensive and requires both extreme secrecy, which would, to my mind, indicate that you have to have gigantic and enormous underground manufacturing capabilities. And I think that's where a lot of that money went, is into these underground facilities to do this. But, in my opinion, too, 3D printing and all of that stuff that's being pushed so heavily in the public now, that's been around for a couple decades. Like it or not, that's been around for a couple decades. But the fact that it's coming out into the public now is interesting, because that drives the price of these things down. I mean, my word, 20 years ago, a three-dimensional printer would have cost tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Now they're just starting to creep into the range where the home computer was back in the 1980s. They were expensive, and if you could afford them, you could have one in your home. But the price dropped dramatically after the 1980s. You know, we have more computing power on our desk for $800 right now.
Yeah.
Than NASA had in the 1960s.
Joseph,
for millions of dollars.
Yeah. Somebody told me the other day that Japan has an automobile that just skims along the earth. It doesn't require roads, nothing.
Well,
and it doesn't require gasoline and oil.
Again, okay. Let's go back to the movie Back to the Future. Do you remember that with Michael Fox?
Yes.
Traveling back in time. All right. In the second movie in that series, Back to the Future 2, he travels forward in time, and the skateboards that the youngsters are skateboarding around on have no wheels. They just hover above the ground.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Now, what most people don't remember is that those skateboards were actually sold publicly. You could actually go buy the skateboard that would hover.
Oh, my gosh.
And they were taken off the market.
Oh.
All right? And the excuse was, if I recall correctly, that the skateboard was too dangerous. You know, people were flipping up and losing their balance on these things.
Oh, gee.
Because you're dealing with a technology that really, in the final analysis, has no friction. So, you know, you're not used to dealing with it. And what really is the case is, you know, you're dealing with a technology that they knew how to do this stuff in the 1980s and were willing to market it as a toy.
Yeah, gee. Okay. My God. Oh.
So, you know, that's a little indicator right there. And if you search around online long enough, you can find these things.
Wow.
On eBay, you can still find some of these skateboards with their little ceramic magnets or whatever it was that they had in these things.
Oh.
But, you know, I think they've had a lot of this stuff for a very long time. You know, there's indicators like this all over that they've had capabilities that would boggle the mind. And, you know, the question is, well, why don't they release them? And I go back to what I've said all along, that some of these technologies are so dangerous if you weaponize them, and it becomes very difficult to prevent proliferation. So, yeah, do I find it unlikely that the Japanese may have had a hover car? No.
Oh,
you know, the Japanese, just incidentally, came out again with another proposal for one of their crazy solar microwave power plants. You know, the last one, they wanted to put solar panels around the entire equator of the moon and turn the whole moon into a big solar power plant to beam microwave energy back to the Earth, you know, and solve the planet. And cook us, yeah. You know? And, you know, I thought that was interesting because China, about 3 days later, said, yeah, we want to turn the moon into a Death Star, too, you know, and that's the words they used. It wasn't me editorializing.
Oh, my gosh.
So, you know, the Chinese read exactly what the potential there was. But now the Japanese have come out with a plan. Well, we want to build these big orbiting solar power plants to beam microwave electrical power back to the Earth. And again, you know, that's perfectly understandable. The sun is an inexhaustible energy supply.
Yeah.
And build power plants like that and put them in orbit and beam the microwaves back to Earth, and we're set. You know, we can power everything.
Yeah.
No pollution, no nothing. You know, there's that little problem with the microwaves and cooking a certain part of, you know, South Dakota or wherever it is.
Oh, gee.
But you know, that's a huge statement for Japan to come out and make. Just think of the geopolitical implications of it. Think of the financial implications of it. And that's the problem here. Yeah,
some of the old line oil families would lose their fortunes. The petrodollar financial system would be obsolete immediately. And the fact of the matter is, it is obsolete. It's obsolete now. Yes, it is.
The problem for these elites is how do we transition to that next stage without a huge world upset, a huge catastrophe, without the dangers of proliferation of weaponized forms of it into the wrong hands. That's their problem.
Well,
it's not the release of the technology. The technology problem is really a proliferation and weaponization problem.
Well,
and
Joseph,
a financial one.
Yeah, they're weaponizing food.
Yeah.
And they're weaponizing water. I can't think of anything that they haven't.
But you're missing my point. These technologies are much easier to weaponize than genetic engineering.
Yeah.
This stuff it's not a matter of what they're doing. It's a matter of the ease of the technology to be used by someone in their garage to come up with something horrible. That's the problem.
Look at
and of course, if you had enough genetic science, you could do something like that in your garage, but you'd have to be able to buy the equipment to do it, and that would set off alarm bells. But I still think that their main problem is the proliferation financial problem. But I think that we're seeing the signs with their push of 3D printing, with all of the talk that they're pushing about outer space.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are deliberately doing some social engineering that's going to be a long project to get everybody thinking along these lines.
Oh boy!
Because that's the thing that's coming down the pike, and they can't stop it. So they intend to at least be able to exert some control over it.
Well, let's go back to the first
cosmic war.
the first creation.
Mm-hmm.
Why did they destroy that creation?
Well, in the gap within Christian theology, the gap theorists have always maintained some version that Lucifer was the planetary angel,
mm-hmm.
and that he, after he had fallen, began to do things with the planet that were not according to God's designs, and therefore it had to be destroyed and started over, and that Adam was to take his place, and so on. And Lucifer corrupted him, and we know the story. That's kind of the basic gap theory outline.
Okay.
There are non-Christian versions of it,
yeah.
and this is what people have to wrap their minds around. And as you know, in the esoteric cosmology, in the Jewish Kabbalah, there are 4 Adams.
Mm-hmm.
There's Adam Kadmon, the cosmic Adam,
mm-hmm.
the spiritual Adam, and Adam falls through 4 levels from mineral to vegetable and finally to animal man.
Yeah.
And assumes a body. And even in esoteric thinking, that's your baptism. You fall into the body. Why? Because what are our bodies? Well, they're big sacks of water.
Yeah, it's true.
So in other words, you're immersed in water. So that's their thinking in one kind of esoteric tradition of what baptism really is. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But it is interesting that even in the early liturgies of the church, in the ritual of baptism, you have an exorcism that's performed over the waters. Why? Because the waters are symbolic of the primeval waters, the Tehom, the Tiamat.
Yes.
All right. And in the Babylonian mythology, Tiamat was the really bad lady.
Yeah.
she was the villainess par excellence. So,
yeah.
So you have all of those holdovers, but I think I know where you're trying to go. Is there a spiritual component to all this? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a great big huge kernel of truth in all of these mythologies about falls and cosmic wars and
yeah.
demons and so on and so forth. When I think of extraterrestrial, I don't think necessarily that we're dealing with people in bodies.
Yeah.
We could be equally dealing with spiritual forces manifesting themselves. In other words, when I say it, I'm not excluding any particular interpretation of it.
Right.
It's other people use different terms for those things, but I think you're dealing with a very complex phenomenon that may involve all of them, and that's always been kind of my approach to everything, is a both-and approach rather than an either-or approach.
Well, I think that's good, and it's wise. Joseph, when Adam is created, it sounds like, when you read it, it sounds like an operating room and some kind of gas or nitrous oxide was given. And then they take his, a rib. That sounds like cloning. And the woman...
Stem cells.
Pardon?
Stem cells. Where do you take stem cells from?
Yes. And the woman's body is very much like a man's, only with different plumbing and different wiring in the brain.
Well, yeah. Well, get to your question. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm thinking certain things myself.
Okay. I mean, this wasn't just some guy with a magic wand that spoke and said, now you will be a man. And, I mean, there was an operation that went on. And I mean, in operation in every sense of the word.
Well, I mean, if you're reading the text along these kinds of technological lines rather than traditional, spiritual lines, I think you can. I think the case that people that have argued that way over the years, I think, unlike most academics, I tend to think, again, it's a possibility. And I didn't mean to, flatter myself as being an academic. I left that world long ago, but I think you know what I mean.
Yes.
I don't exclude the possibility. Eve, the problem with the biblical text is that in the Jewish midrash, in the midrashim, there are some glosses on those verses in Genesis chapter 1 that said God created him, male and female created he him.
Yes.
Okay, in other words, Adam was a masculine androgyne, and that was picked up in the Christian patristic tradition. It carried on even as late as Maximus the Confessor and John, my memories, John Scotus Eriugena. So it's been there in the Christian tradition. Most people are simply unaware that it was ever there.
Well,
but here's the problem. Let me get to the problem. The assumption of the texts and that tradition has been that the default setting, in other words, of humanity was masculine. Okay?
Yes.
But if you study the genetics, modern genetics, they tell you the exact opposite. The default setting is feminine, female, and it's the masculine, it's the male that's the special programming. In other words, you have to, if left to its own devices, everybody would be women.
Oh my gosh! Whoa!
Which. And again, there's that aspect of the old esoteric tradition too. That the sacred mother goddess, the sacred feminine or what have you. So there's always been that, but there's that conflict between the Judeo-Christian kind of default setting to masculine and modern genetics with the default setting to feminine. And I don't know that there's any good resolution between the texts. When Dr. DeHart and I were doing transhumanism, we emphasized the masculine androgyne because we think that probably what was really going on with some of those texts is that they were thinking analogically once again.
Mm-hmm.
They were projecting projecting sexual distinction to God, and in order to account for the rise of the masculine in the process of differentiation, then the masculine had to be present in some fashion at the top of the chain. And, that's kind of a bad way of illustrating what was in our process of reasoning, but we think that may be part of why you have that conflict between those ancient texts and modern science. But it's an interesting, I don't rule out of the picture your idea that the texts are describing something vaguely and suspiciously technological in nature.
Yeah.
Genesis is, pardon me, the verses in Genesis, when we read in English, God said, "Let us go down and make man in our image and after our likeness."
Mm-hmm.
The word for God that is in the Hebrew text there is Elohim.
Yes.
All right.
Plural.
Elohim. In Hebrew, you have to say more than plural. You have to remind people that in the Hebrew there is a singular form of a word, there is a dual form of the word, in other words, two, and then there's a three or more form of the word. So Elohim, when you say plural, you have to understand that it's the three or more form that is being used here.
Oh.
Yeah, oh.
Well, Joseph, we know that some people are born what is popularly called homosexual. They know from an early age.
Mm-hmm.
They can do brain studies.
Mm-hmm.
And some...
Yeah, we pointed that out in the transhumanism book.
Yeah, some men that are born male, their brain is wired like a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa. And today, with so much hatred and so much bigotry toward homosexuals, what I'm asking is, could that creation have produced a line or some genetic trait that later produced homosexuals?
Well, I don't know about that. Certainly you'd get a conservative theological school that would say, well, no, that's impossible. God prohibited that, and therefore wouldn't have designed that.
God makes no mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, et cetera, so on and so forth. But looking at purely the scientific aspect of it and the esoteric aspect of it, if you grant the idea that humanity may have been originally some sort of androgyne.
Yes.
And this isn't a view unique to esoteric Judaism or Christian patristic tradition. You find it in Plato, you find it in the Mayan Popol Vuh of all places.
Yeah.
It's a pretty consistent imagery. And if you grant any reality to it, then, in my opinion, in my thinking, and kind of it was what Dr. DeHart and I were kind of struggling with when we ran across this in doing the transhumanism book. He was the one that made that finding at Oak Ridge that they're studying alcoholism, tongue rolling, ear wiggling, perfect musical pitch, and homosexuality.
Yeah.
What
That's
a list.
amazing. Yeah.
And then you have these geneticists that have discovered that the neurophysiology of homosexuals is different. It is literally a third sexual characteristic.
Yes.
So in other words, they're expanding the idea of sexuality, or expanding it and not simply restricting it to what set of gonads do you carry, but how is your brain architecture constructed? Well, they've discovered that in the case of many homosexuals, you've got a masculine male type of division of the hemispheres of the brain, but you have a female amygdala connecting the two.
Oh my goodness.
So what is that? Is it masculine? Is it feminine? What is it? It's a tertium quid. It's a third thing. It's a third sexual characteristic. So in our thinking, in my opinion, if you grant the possibility that this ancient imagery may be, again, telling us a truth, then if you go to divide the sexes genetically somehow, that are originally somehow biologically one, then it stands to reason, at least to me, that you're not going to be able to get rid of feminine characteristics in men completely, or of masculine characteristics in women completely.
Right.
There's a whole set of, and we've talked about this in transhumanism, there's a whole set of complications that women have. Medical complications are very serious that women have. Occasionally, rarely, women are born with Y chromosomes present in their genomes.
Yeah. And,
these poor people suffer horrible health consequences as a result of this in some cases. So again, genetics is telling us that the dividing line isn't as clear or neat as our metaphysical and religious systems would have us believe.
Oh, our religious systems are whacked out.
Well,
they're ignorant. They're ignorant.
In that case, I tend to agree with you that science is telling us to be a lot more tolerant of people that are telling us that they've been born and they've had these feelings and this was not a choice they made. It's literally wired into their physical existence.
Right.
So 6 of one, half a dozen of another here. It's all where you decide to place your confidence in some of these ancient images. And for me, the choice is clear. The more I've investigated all these ancient texts and images of science and so on, it becomes more and more clear as our own science advances. These ancient texts become clearer to understand. So in other words, these ancient texts are residues of a civilization that had a similar pitch of scientific development. And in that case, for me, it's very clearly you have to fall on the side of tolerance and think very carefully through things.
Yes, absolutely true. Oh, well, reiterate that part in Genesis when the creator person speaks.
Well, it's in Genesis chapters 1, verses 26 and 27, and I've never been able to just pull Bible verses out of my head, but the paraphrase of the verse is, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. And then the next verse, male and female created he them, is usually the way it's translated in English, but there are, as I pointed out, in the Septuagint text of the Old Testament, if I remember correctly, I don't have my Septuagint right in front of me, so I can't look at it. In that text, if I remember correctly, it's a singular. So in other words, it's not male and female created he them, but the word in the Greek, if I remember correctly, is masculine singular. Male and female created he him.
Yeah.
And you actually have that. Reading repeated in some of the rabbinical midrashim. So, in other words, you have the idea that mankind was this, the original Adam was this kind of
androgyne?
An oxymoronic masculine androgyne. I don't know how else to put it, because again, in Greek the words in Greek, you have, masculine inflections of a pronoun, you have feminine inflections of a pronoun, and then you have neuter inflections of a pronoun. And in that case, the inflection is masculine. So take it for what it's worth.
Yeah. Well, I think that's worth quite a bit.
Well, it's worth quite a bit because, the Septuagint version is the version of the Old Testament that the predominant majority of early Christians in the first few centuries were reading. They weren't reading the Hebrew text; they were reading the Greek text.
Yeah.
So it's easy to see why you had that patristic tradition arise.
Mm-hmm. Well, I always thought it was interesting that they brought animals to Adam, and none of them were found to be suitable companions.
Right.
you know, and so after that, then
we have to clone a companion.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, again, that's for me, the more interesting version of the story are the ones that are told in the Karsag tablets, where you get the story of the engineering of man, the creation of man from human or humanoid females and the gods male, whoever or whatever they were.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to the fact that if this story is true, there has to be some genetic compatibility to begin with. In other words, you're dealing with two branches of the same genus.
Yeah.
Or two species within the same genus, whatever.
Right.
And that means, if these gods are literally, showing up from some other planet, that means that the genus of humanity, Homo sapiens, the genus, is extended beyond this planet. And if you're dealing with spiritual things, then it's clear that these spiritual things, whatever they are, manifest themselves in physical form in some sort of humanoid fashion.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't solve the mystery. It just makes it more. It makes it more profound.
Oh boy, does it ever! Well, oh gosh, Joseph, in the New Testament, at the Last Supper, when Jesus says, "Eat of this, it is my body, drink of this, it is my blood." When I was a child, I was raised Catholic, and at my first communion, I couldn't do it because that was eating a human body and drinking human blood. It was just cannibalistic to me.
It was a form of cannibalism. Well, I don't know how you want me to comment on that. That teaching is fairly universal. I mean, it's interpreted slightly differently, but in most Christian traditions, be it Anglican or Roman Catholic or Lutheran or Eastern Orthodox or Coptic or what have you, that some form of the doctrine of the real presence is taught by all of those churches. They have different details on how they understand it, but the basic concept is the same. But it's interesting that scientists recently have discovered that if they transfuse blood of younger creatures into older creatures, like mice, if they transfuse the blood of young mice into older mice, the older mice get more energy.
Yeah.
They draw some youth and vitality from the younger blood. And it's very clear in those Eucharistic passages in the Gospel of St. John that this is somehow connected to your eternal life. I don't have any good, easy answer to, a kind of quasi-scientific explanation of that. I'm just pointing this out. That again, you're not dealing with an idea that is per se all that unreal. What most people forget, because they're not sufficiently familiar with the texts of the liturgy, and it was bound to arise within Roman Catholicism because the liturgy was in Latin and most people didn't understand it, what was actually being said. But if you grew up in an Episcopal church, and I was raised in the Methodist Episcopal Church, which kept much of the ritual of the actual Episcopal Church. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when we had communion, it was kind of a high Methodist church that I grew up in, and it was that kind of high Episcopalian ritual that was used. And what that ritual does is it goes back to concepts that you actually find embedded within the old Latin Mass, but most people never heard them. Mm-hmm. When the bread and the wine are being prepared by the celebrant of the Mass in the old Latin Mass, reference is made to the doctrine of the Incarnation and to a doctrine called the circumcision of attributes, in Greek the perichoresis. People that know doctrinal theology will know what I'm talking about and where I'm going. And the doctrine is that because Christ, the divine person, exists in two natures simultaneously, divine and human, mm-hmm. that the attributes or operations of the divine nature are transmitted to the human nature through his person, all right? Mm. So in other words, by partaking of his physical body and blood, what you're actually consuming, what you're actually joining yourself to, are the operations of his divine nature. So it's not ultimately, in that understanding of these ancient liturgies and rituals, it's not ultimately an act of cannibalism that you're performing. You're uniting yourself to the divine nature. You're being deified, in other words. You're partaking of immortal life, fountain of youth, and all of that. So it's kind of a different, when you examine the actual theology behind it, it's actually kind of different, really, ultimately, than just mere physical cannibalism. But anyway,
well, I
can understand, people's reticence and
I had a bad
difficulties with
experience with it. My mother took me to a church to have me baptized, and I was very young. I had to stand on a little stool, put my head over the basin in the church, and they baptized me, sprinkled the water, And after that, Joseph, the priest had a heart attack, died, and the church burned down. So I figured that was not a good thing,
Well, again, what can I say? I
know.
I'm very, very reluctant to comment on people's personal spiritual experiences.
I know.
Because that requires a great deal of discernment, and I certainly don't claim to have it. For my own part, even though I've long ago stopped being interested in ecclesiastical life, on the other hand, I'm extremely skeptical of those who want to take these liturgies and rituals and attempt to update them in an effort to make them appeal somehow to modern man. That was the whole reasoning or so-called logic behind the massive changes in the Roman Catholic ritual at Vatican II. And I don't think it's an experiment ultimately that worked.
No.
If it did anything, it took all the mystery out of their ritual. And we have to remember those rituals are they're an expression of faith. They're an expression of people's culture, and to lay hands on them in a crude fashion without that understanding is just really not a very good thing.
Yeah.
I just kind of I balk at that. It's just not a good thing to do.
Well, let's go back to outer space.
Okay. We're talking about popes and aliens.
What how did they, we've never discovered that I'm aware of any crashed, really ancient, I mean thousands or millions of years old artifact that would have been applicable for travel of people that came here. So could they have arrived in an interdimensional way, or how do you see that, Joseph?
How do I see it? Well, again, that's complex. I disagree that there's no evidence of anything millions of years old that's an artifact.
Okay.
Again, if you take the Cassini pictures of Saturn's moon Iapetus or Iapetus,
yeah.
To me, clearly, it shows all the signs of artificiality.
Yeah.
And if so, it's millions of years old. Okay, it's artificial, but it's battered beyond belief, cratered, and so on. And crater counts are one way that planetary geologists measure the age of something.
Iapetus.
Iapetus, yeah.
Okay.
And that would make this thing millions of years old. And clearly, the most recent explanations of that equatorial ridge around that planet.
Yes.
That it used to have rings like Saturn itself, and for whatever reason, the rings were in an instability, and they all crashed to the equator.
Oh boy.
That's the explanation. I mean, that's
silly.
Well, of course it is. But it was peer reviewed.
Oh yes, peer review. That's another issue.
Well, we don't need to go there.
John, this peer review stuff it's nauseating. I know doctors who write articles that are peer reviewed, and 5 years after that, their stuff is a bunch of lies.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, what value?
The falsification and the fraud that has gone on. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's there's no magical formula for ascertaining the truth. Everybody has a God-given mind and can use it. That's my philosophy.
Yeah.
We don't need committees of conformity.
Right.
But the other problem with the interdimensional idea, I'm greatly respectful of the views of Dr. Jacques Vallée.
Yes.
Because Vallée has pointed out that many UFO phenomena just do not fit the bill of a nuts and bolts technology.
Yeah.
They resemble more the stories of medieval incubuses and succubuses and apparitions and so on and so forth. And I don't rule that out of the picture at all. For me, the problem there is you have a certain segment of people that are looking at that as a hypothesis by which to justify their religion.
Yes.
In other words, Christian fundamentalists, I'm thinking in particular of one well-known Eastern Orthodox monastic priest that wrote a whole book precisely on this topic, and I'm not going to mention names. Most people that are in the Orthodox Church will know who I'm talking about. So, out of respect, I don't mention names, but this gentleman inclined to the view that, well, all of this is demonic. But you are, because of your religious system and your religious tradition. And there are many Protestant evangelicals that hold the same view. Well, again, the problem with this view is, how do you know? Other than your system, how do you know?
Yeah.
And again, it's an assumption a priori. It's an assumption before the fact. And this could put you into a real pickle if somebody shows up on planet Earth and the religious community starts shooting at them, or claiming anybody that has contact with them has had contact with the devil and his followers and blah blah blah.
Well, isn't that what they would do with Jesus? They'd shoot him.
Well, you know that there's that little problem, but my point here is a priori pronouncements are not the way to go. You have to judge any moral behavior, be it human or anyone else's, by their fruits.
Yes.
And it is clear, to me anyway, that much UFO activity, and I'm not even talking about abduction cases or contactee cases or anything of the sort. I'm talking merely about UFO activity such as UFOs that set themselves on collision courses with airplanes, which has happened and been reported and caused airplanes to go take emergency evasive action to sometimes, in many cases, the injury of the crew or the passengers of the airplane. I'm talking about UFOs starting missile ICBM countdowns, starting the launch process in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
These kinds of activities are demonstrative. They're messages.
Yeah.
And I don't see how you can be in the American or the Russian or the British or the French military establishments and be monitoring these things and come to any other conclusions other than these pose, if not an imminent, then at least a potential threat.
Well,
that
Joseph,
this is hostile activity.
Absolutely. Could a UFO have scooped up that Flight 700?
Well, on the Malaysia Air Flight 370 thing, I just had a comment today on my website from somebody. Well, if you're looking for woo-woo explanations, and I've never said anything of the sort, I have merely maintained that the one possibility that no one is talking about is the possibility that it simply did disappear by whatever mechanism, and no one knows exactly why or how.
Yeah, that's the flight.
That's all I've maintained. Right. I understand.
I didn't mean.
And that's I understand.
The other flight.
And that's the only thing I've said. And I'm simply saying it because, in the absence of a clear story with good evidence to document the story, you have to maintain the possibility as an equally reasonable possibility. Okay? Now,
yes.
Once we've said that, once we've admitted the possibility, then, we have to deal with how then does this take place. Was this some sort of natural phenomenon of geophysics or whatever, similar in nature to, all the reports around the Bermuda Triangle and so on?
Yeah.
Is that what we're looking at? Well, we don't have enough evidence to make a determination. Are we looking at a technology that made it go poof, be it human or otherwise? Again, we don't have enough information to make a determination. So once we admit the possibility, then we have to hold open those possibilities. And therefore, could it have been, as a logical possibility, could it have been a UFO made it go poof? Well, sure. The problem is, and again, I'm saying that's a logical possibility once you admit the greater possibility as rationally plausible in the absence of evidence to the contrary, that the plane simply disappeared and no one knows how to explain it.
Yeah.
And that's the feeling I'm getting from the story. That quite honestly, and that was my feeling, as you know, very early on when the flight disappeared and the first theories started to be floated out there. There's no less. Someone sent me an email just the other day. There's no less than 13 hypotheses out there right now.
Oh boy!
But in the list that he sent me, none of them mention the possibility that I mentioned, that it simply went poof and no one knows what happened to it.
Yeah.
In other words, that's the possibility that everyone's not admitting. And that's therefore the possibility that I'm hammering and looking at the most closely, because it seems to be the possibility that is being deliberately excluded from the public discourse and talk about this. That's what I find totally suspicious here.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
You know,
and
I
kidding.
grant you, Georgianne, I'm the first to grant you, and you know, God bless this person that wrote the comment on my website and said, you know, this is woo-woo. Well, it is woo-woo. You know,
yeah.
I'm the first person to admit it. But I'm admitting the possibility simply because there's no evidence yet that is incontestable that supports any of the other theories compulsively. In my mind.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm being the black sheep here and bleeding my hypothesis. But yeah, you guys haven't considered this yet. You guys haven't considered that yet. And they don't want to consider that because that would be to admit that they don't know what happened to it. You see, they're caught in a game here.
Yes,
They're caught in their own presuppositions and their own paradigms. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. And, you know, the problem with those presuppositions and paradigms is it's been a couple of months now that they've been investigating along those lines, along the lines of their presuppositions and paradigms, and they can't agree on a story. And for me, that's the problem. That's why I'm maintaining this 14th possibility that it may have just disappeared and no one knows what happened to it. Mm-hmm. Or it may have disappeared and someone knows and we're using something. You know, I don't know.
Well, with all the technology that
we've been talking about?
Yeah.
Bingo, I mean, ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
They know when somebody blows their fricking nose. I mean, they can read a license plate. They can see how you part your hair,
yes,
and from space.
Yeah, but whoa, stop! I know you're on a roll, and I know what you're saying, but the problem is to do this, Georgianne, to read the license plate, you have to dedicate that resource to that particular region. Yeah, and look closely. When you're looking closely at this license plate, then you're not seeing the license plate right next to it. So, in other words, to maintain that they have a satellite picture of the plane and what happened to it means that they're tracking it and tracking it closely and not looking at other things, okay? Mm-hmm. And if they're doing that, that means that you are forcing them to admit that we were following this plane for a reason, and therefore, if they're going to admit that, then they have to disclose what the reason is, and that they cannot do. So they're not going to admit that they dedicated satellite resources to following this thing, and therefore they can't come up with satellite. You see, again, they're caught in this vicious loop. Yes. And I'm not excluding the fact. Please don't get me wrong, folks. I'm not excluding these other scenarios. That's not what I'm doing. I'm simply saying it is as reasonable, given the state of the evidence and the story as we have it now. There is nothing that persuades me to exclude this final, ultimate, weird hypothesis. Right. There's nothing. Right. That's the problem for me. And again, I don't care how many people out there want to make fun of me on this score. I'm sticking with it because until I see a story that really makes some sort of sense. My problem, Georgianne, with all of these scenarios about abductions, pilot suicides, Boeing turning on their remote control device and flying the thing to Diego Garcia and hiding the plane and doing God knows what with all those poor people. Yeah. Or any of these other covert operation scenarios. My problem with it, with those scenarios, is that if this was something that people suspect that the United States or its allies did, then you should see China or Russia screaming bloody murder about it. Yes. In today's geopolitical context, they would be making hay over this, and they're not. Right. So is it a covert operation that China or Russia launched? Well, again, the shoe's on the same foot. If the United States suspected that these countries orchestrated some covert operation to hijack a plane and do God knows what with all those poor passengers on it, then the United States would be screaming bloody murder about it in this geopolitical context. And it's not. And I have to look at this and wonder, okay, why are these politicians involved in this in the first place, and why aren't they pointing fingers at each other?
A good question, Joseph. Excellent. Yes.
And, you know, the only thing I can think of is if that's the case, if they're not pointing fingers at each other, and this is a covert operation, then it's a covert operation that involves all of them.
Yeah.
And in that case, if that's the case, then what are they up to? And none of the covert operation scenarios out there that people are talking about make any sense.
Yeah.
And the other problem is, okay, if they're not involved in a covert operation, then what the heck is really going on? What are they hiding? And in that reading of things, well, one of the things they might be hiding is they just don't know what happened to it.
That's right. Oh my gosh. Well, I've heard of UFOs that have scooped up people's cars. Mm-hmm. You know, a UFO could have scooped up that plane.
Sure, you know, there's reports of from Puerto Rico. Jerome, what's his name, Clark, wrote about cases in Puerto Rico where people have seen these UFOs and U.S. Navy jets flying, and all of a sudden the UFO swallows them up.
Yeah.
There's the Kinross case of the UFO from the 1950s, where some F-86 Sabre jets were scrambled to a radar blip that was an unknown flying over Lake Superior. Mm-hmm. And the blips merged. The aircraft merged with the UFO blip, and the aircraft were never found.
Yeah.
No debris, no wreckage, no bodies.
Mm-hmm. Tip off. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't exclude things.
Yeah.
I don't exclude the exotic here until we have a clear, conclusive story about this thing. I hold it open as a possibility.
Yeah.
And yeah, that puts me in the woo-woo, tinfoil hat, wacky.
Oh, come on. Oh,
well, but be honest, Georgia, and that's what it sounds like to most people. Until you hear my reasoning behind it, it sounds that way. And I'm not really very good at articulating my reasoning for thinking that. You know, I've tried here tonight, but I just don't. You know, given all the strange UFO incidents that are there, you know, in the NICAP books and the MUFON books on Peter Davenport's site, I'm not willing to exclude at this stage this possibility from the Malaysia Air 370 problem.
Well, I agree. I am in agreement with you. I mean, things that disappear. People disappear. Animals disappear. Mm-hmm. Objects disappear. Mm-hmm. All kinds of things disappear. And, I mean, there was that whole regiment that marched up a mountain and disappeared in a cloud and were never heard of or seen ever again.
Yeah, there's all sorts of strange things like this, Georgianne.
Yes.
And, you know, like it or not, you know, most people think these things are woo-woo because they live in this nice, rationalistic, closed system universe that, you know, we've been living with ever since Isaac Newton.
Yeah. And,
you know, if anything, I'm of the view that if the fundamentals of quantum mechanics are true, then the universe is a lot wackier and crazier
than we know.
Than Isaac Newton ever thought it was. Thought to be possible. But
that's right. Oh my gosh. Oh, Joseph. Good grief. Well, in the book of Revelation, it says that the heavens will roll up like a scroll.
Like a curtain.
Yeah, like a scroll. What does that mean? I mean, that's a big event if it comes to pass, or if someone makes it look like it comes to pass. There's a lot of stuff that is just, it seems not plausible.
Right.
But with today's technologies, And
it's not so far-fetched.
Yeah, and especially the technologies that most people
we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Don't even suspect. Yeah.
Yes.
If again, it's just basic here, folks. If you admit the possibility that you can engineer the fabric of space-time locally on a laboratory bench.
Yeah.
And they're doing it. Forget about the story of the Nazi bell and all of this stuff. They're doing experiments now where they are cloaking events from the temporal stream.
Yes.
Okay? Now, folks, they're telling you that they're tinkering with the fabric of space-time in the laboratory.
Yeah.
They're telling you. That's what they're telling you.
And the next step, Joseph, will be they'll take it out of the lab to have a little experiment here or there.
Well, that's precisely my point.
Yeah.
We're told things now, and I'm of that, alternative community philosophy that we're told things about 30 years after they've actually done them.
Yes. Yeah.
If we can cloak certain things in the laboratory, can that, at least conceptually, although it's different in degree of scale, of course, enormously. If you can cloak, could we make an airplane disappear?
Could we make Washington, D.C. disappear?
Well, that's a nice thought.
Yes, it is. It excites me. Yes.
Yeah, they've messed up the temporal stream.
Yeah, they have.
Badly. We can add Paris and London and Berlin and Rome and Moscow and Madrid and a whole lot of other places to that. So, but no, that's my point here. Once you start tinkering with this kinds of physics, and my point is, you don't have to listen to me. Go online and look for temporal cloaking. And it'll take you to all sorts of papers and articles at phys.org, peer-reviewed stuff, folks. Mm-hmm. And if you're tinkering with that, if you admit this possibility, once the possibility's open, these little laboratory experiments are the camel's nose in the door.
Oh, yeah.
And when the camel's nose is in the door, there's a camel behind it. Lumps, ugly lumps and all.
Yep, that's right.
So, I'm not ruling anything out of the picture in this Malaysian flight case until we have a good, non-obfuscated story, and that's the problem. The story at almost every step. I mean, that article I read to you when we were talking earlier tonight from my website of Malaysia coming out and releasing the satellite data in the same day that its former prime minister comes out and says, oh, don't look at all this stuff in the Indian Ocean. That's just nuts. This is all a big covert operation, and the CIA's behind it. Well, again, why are you releasing data and turning around and allowing a former prime minister to completely contradict it? And that's my point. The story has been obfuscated from day one. Mm-hmm. So someone's hiding something, and that has spawned all of these covert operations conspiracy theories, but in the process, they're forgetting that final possibility. No one knows what happened to it.
Right.
It went poof.
It went poof. I think it went poof. Yes, I do. I can't, somebody made it go poof. And evidently, they don't know who made it go poof.
Somebody or something.
Yeah.
That's, I'm not, again, to me, it's just the rational possibility that you have to admit, especially, this is my point here, especially when you consider all of the other things that they're telling us that they're doing.
Yeah.
Right on their scientific websites. Right on their, temporal cloaking.
Jiminy.
Removing an event from the temporal stream. Well, how do you do that? Well, quantum mechanics tells you how.
Oh, gee.
A physical event is a physical event only if it's observed.
Oh, my gosh. Huh. Wow. Wow, Joseph. Well, I'll bet that we start seeing a lot of strange things going on. Oh,
I don't... we'll talk about that off the air.
Okay. I can't wait. Oh, boy. Well, oh boy, the whole thing, you know, there's increasingly articles about Christians love war, and Christians can't wait for the Battle of Armageddon to begin because their Jesus is going to come save them. And I don't think it's going to work out like that.
Well, speaking from the wing of kind of liberal Christianity here, I'm certainly not of that view. I never was.
Yes.
Even in my tradition days. And,
right.
There are many, many Christians. This is why people have to get out of the idea of thinking in terms of system. There are millions of Christians that are in that liberal wing that don't think that way at all.
Right.
One of my good friends from college is a Congregationalist minister and is definitely in that camp. And I was never in it myself in my church days, when either as an Anglican or Methodist or Orthodox, and I know Roman Catholics that aren't. It's just it's a certain mentality that you're looking at more than anything else that I find frightening.
Well, it's Christian Zionism.
It's God's going to get you and punish you, and and it's the gloating over it. Where's the love? Where's the love of Christ in this? God's going to come back and slay all those Muslims, or God's going to come back and slay all those non-Christ believing Jews, or God's going to come back and knock some Christian heads together and persuade everybody of the truth of Islam through the great Imam Mahdi and all of this stuff. And we have to remember the same holds true of Islam. You've got a very radical group that has kind of captured the voice of Islam, but billions of Muslims thinking this? Come on.
Gee, I know.
It's
brainwashing,
it's brainwashing and it's frightening.
I think religion was devised. It was made up by men, and it was devised to keep humanity divided.
I don't fundamentally have any difficulty with that view. The details of arguing it, that's the problem. I have my suspicions, and again, that's something for off the air and maybe a subsequent book. But I've had my suspicions for a long time as to what I think has been going on, and
well,
maybe
Joseph,
someday I'll write about it.
I hope so, and so do a lot of the listeners. They are literally poisoning our food, poisoning the water. Right now up on Lake Michigan, a group wants to store nuclear waste right next to the Great Lakes. They're doing all kinds of things all over the world to decrease the population. And
I don't know if, again, I know that has been a persistent meme out there. People point to Bill Gates or to Gardner in front of the Congress in the 1950s, or to the Georgia runestones and all of that. I don't discount the possibility, but I've never really been on board with that. They are poisoning things, to be sure.
I mentioned that to a minister, and he says, well, of course, they have to do that because it'll bring the population down so Jesus can manage the population. And I about fell out of my chair. I am not kidding you.
I don't. And again, my point here, Georgianne, is that these people don't really understand what they're saying about Christ when they say this.
Right.
What they've just done is they've repudiated their own system's teaching about who Christ was.
Yes. Absolutely.
It's just, you know, at a certain point, you
well, I've told you,
shake your head and laugh.
Yeah, I've told you some of the things that so-called Christian ministers have said to me.
Oh yeah, I know.
And it just, it really takes me back.
Well, you know, even sitting here atop my perch of liberal Christianity or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, there's still enough adherence to traditional doctrine in my thinking and in my piety to just hear these things and just kind of shake my head.
I know. I know.
It's just, oh my. Well, you know, I don't know how to, you know, I avoid people like that because they're just
boy, you're not kidding.
They're just kind of spiritual downers.
Yeah.
They're just so screwed up. You know, I'm you know, I don't even want to go there.
No, Joseph. Well, wow.
The wackiness of it is just so, you know, the wackiness in order to justify a position of genocide and murder, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, it just really leaves one kind of breathless.
You know, I found it interesting. The Boko Haram, which is a terrorist group in Nigeria, kidnapped 200 or 300 little schoolgirls.
Yeah.
And there was such a fuss over it. And then the United States says, well, we're sending in troops and drones. And do you know that same day an article came out that, no need, we have found the little girls.
Well,
stay out of our country, you know.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe for once the threat of sending in troops and drones did some good. I don't know. You know, I had my suspicions about that whole thing when it first, you know, broke. But
yeah.
There's really no explanation for any of this other than insanity.
Yeah.
There's this growing insanity, and
well,
it makes remaining rational a spiritual struggle.
Yeah, it does. Well, you know, Operation Paperclip, and we brought all the Nazis here. We gave, put the ones that weren't really talented in science, we put them in Hollywood, we put them in schools and universities to, you know, play their part. And
the really talented ones we sent to Area 51.
Yeah. Or the Skunk Works.
Or the Skunk Works.
And Joseph, today, look at the Ukraine and the Crimea. I mean, I know that's a complicated situation.
Oh, very.
But the politicians in this country are supporting Nazis. And there is a huge right swing in France right now, and in Greece, where fascism is coming back. And fascism is Zionism, is Bolshevikism, you know, all the isms. It's just evil.
Well,
and how?
I think you're oversimplifying a bit here. Let's go to what's taking place in Europe. Yes, you're seeing the rise of fascist movements, and you're seeing the rise of, in many cases, I think these are overlapping with a deeper phenomenon, particularly in France's case. Someone in Australia just sent me an article about the French elections. Apparently, the anti-EU party scored almost a third of the vote in France. You know, that's for French politics. That's huge.
Yeah, it is.
there's certainly a popular anti-EU sentiment in Germany, and growing certainly as far as I'm aware in Italy and Spain, and these are obviously significant countries. You don't dismiss these things. I think something very interesting may be happening as far as the American response and action in all of this has been. And I'm not for a moment condoning what has been done in the Ukraine. I think it's a form of geopolitical insanity and desperation. It's what we're seeing are hallmarks of desperation.
Yes.
But deeper than that, I think there's something strategically and geopolitically possibly going on here.
Okay.
The backlash from all of the revelations about NSA spying and all of this stuff have obviously affected our goodwill from our traditional allies in Western Europe.
Well, it should.
And I'm thinking, well, of course, it's an inevitability. We're seeing a huge backlash in popular opinion.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in our last interview, even going as high as the German Interior Minister, who's a friend of ours. I mean, he's definitely an Atlanticist. He's all for this NATO, but he himself just said the United States is operating completely without boundaries.
Yeah.
For Dematsier to say this, that's huge. So what I think is happening, you can readily understand the reason why in Eastern Europe those people are extremely skeptical of Russia. It's easily understood. They spent 50 years under the communist boot. And you can sympathize with people in Bulgaria and Romania and the Ukraine and Poland and the Baltic states and so on for looking at the American action there as something they like. It's very understandable. It's very understandable. I suspect what you're going to see is, in addition to the United States pivoting to Asia, you're going to see the United States pivot in Eastern Europe out of Western Europe. In other words, I think you're looking at the possibility of the beginning, and they've already announced a series of minor base closings in Western Europe, ostensibly to save money.
Yeah.
Okay. I suspect what's really going on is we're seeing the United States has reached the decision we can no longer risk the backlash in public opinion of our bases being present in Italy and Germany and Spain and so on. I think they're going to pivot those bases to Eastern Europe. I think there's going to be a massive basing effort in the future in countries like Romania, Poland, the Baltic states, perhaps even Belarusia.
God.
Yeah, oh God. And that will be for the reason of having a more secure position in Europe, because those countries will remain much friendlier to us than Western Europe.
Yeah. And
it will be a way of keeping Western Europe kind of under the thumb. But the drawback there is if you go back to World War II, what happened when England and France gave their guarantee to Poland against Hitler. They were neither of them powerful enough or in any position to lend any sort of real assistance to Poland. They simply couldn't do it. So, the guarantee was more in the nature of a threat than any real benefit to Poland.
Yeah.
And of course Hitler we know the story. He struck that last-minute deal with Stalin and signed that pact. Let's carve up Poland. And, poor Poland was in no position to resist one of those powers, let alone both of them.
Right.
At the same time, on top of it. There's just no way. And this is not to slight the Poles. If you study that campaign carefully, the Poles fought tooth and nail. I mean, it was just, they were very, very bold and courageous in their defense of their country.
Yes.
But the United States, by pivoting, as I suspect may be in the cards, is going to put itself exactly in the position that France and Britain put themselves in with that guarantee to Poland. When Hitler invades, they've got to back it up, so they declare war, and then they sit and do nothing. And in May of next year, Hitler invades France, and that's it.
Oh boy, yeah.
By positioning ourselves there, we are increasing the possibility that we will have to respond to a local geopolitical crisis like that.
Yeah.
And that's what frightens me.
Yeah.
It's a much more risky thing than having bases in Italy and Germany and Spain and so on. But under the circumstances of what's happening, I find it frightening. The other thing I find frightening about what is taking place is this almost, it's almost a mirror of the kind of non-responsiveness that Americans feel from their government vis-a-vis the people.
Yes.
In Germany, again, the popular opinion in Germany is not at all militaristic.
Mm-hmm.
But the behavior of the German government in this Ukrainian thing has just, I mean, it is as militaristic as Germany has sounded since the end of World War II.
Oh, boy.
And that scares the daylights out of me. Like it or not, Germany is still a small country, but it still packs a big punch.
Yeah, and it has a lot of technology.
And it has a lot of technology.
Yeah. Yep.
And knows how to use it. And this concerns me. Because, again, Germany has those ties from World War II with the Ukraine. And again, it was the unpopularity of the Soviet regime in the Ukraine. Just think of the slaughter that was perpetrated in the Ukraine under Nikita Khrushchev.
Oh yeah, the maniac.
These people do have historical reasons for their misgivings about Russia. There's no doubt about it.
But Putin
and those the German connections with that are deep and profound. And again, look at the country that sits between Germany and the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Poland.
Yep. That's right.
I don't blame those people in Warsaw for one moment for feeling a little bit under the thumb here, because Warsaw has requested that America send troops and base them there, and we've responded and said we'll do it. And again, I'm not blaming Warsaw for feeling this way. We're looking at deja vu here, folks, and that's what. Chancellor Bismarck put it wisely back in the 19th century. Some damn fool thing in the Balkans is going to be the cause of the next war, and if you include Ukrainian Moldavia as part of the Balkans, well then there you go.
Oh my gosh. But Putin is not. I don't think he wants war.
No, I don't think he.
This country, the Washington D.C. wants war.
I don't think Washington D.C. wants war. That's where I disagree with everybody. I don't think Washington D.C. wants war, but I think you have a kind of brinksmanship in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
That's very dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's why this pivot to Eastern Europe scenario popped into my mind, looking at all this. I think it's a possibility in the cards to as a means of keeping Western Europe cleanly and thoroughly under the American thumb without having to base troops there. It's a way of satisfying popular opinion. Okay, yeah, finally we'll remove our bases. You guys can take care of yourself. You've got your own A-bombs. And they do.
Oh, boy.
So it's a way of satisfying public opinion and accomplishing the same thing all at the same time. And, it's a revival, for people that know their history, it's a revival of the whole post-Versailles order in Eastern Europe. If you recall, what they did was they broke up the Austrian Empire, which, in my opinion, was a huge geopolitical mistake.
Yeah.
I doubt it could have been held together, quite frankly, but, that left only one major power in Central Europe, and we know which power that was.
Yeah.
And they recognized the large Poland, the Baltic states, and expansion of Romania and so on. Well, the whole geopolitical thinking behind this was they were forming what they called at the time a cordon sanitaire. Okay, a corridor of minor powers in Eastern Europe as a buffer between the Soviet Union and Western Europe, and a group of minor powers encircling Germany. So, their thinking was at Versailles was entirely geopolitical. It was an attempt to contain the Soviet Union and encircle Germany. That's And Zbigniew Brzezinski, to his credit, in his book The Grand Chessboard, comes right out and admits that the real purpose of NATO wasn't simply to contain communism. It was also a means of dealing with the other problem of 20th century geopolitics, and in his own words, that was, quote, the reality of German power, unquote.
Yeah.
So, so what do we have? We now have a European Union that's thoroughly under the economic and political domination of Germany. So
yeah.
Oh, my.
Oh, boy. Well, we're pushing Russia toward China. They have put together some gigantic business deals.
Yes, they have.
And the Ukraine owes Russia a whole bunch of money, billions.
A whole bunch of money, yep.
For gas. And that idiot guy that we put in power over there in the Ukraine says we're not going to pay that price. Boy, I wish I could say that about my gas bill. Oh my God, Joseph. And the Ukraine, they're targeting schools with children in them, bombing them and killing people, and just crazy. So we're supporting these Nazis in the Ukraine, and what kind of people what kind of politicians support this kind of BS that's going on over there? Are they themselves Nazis?
Well, oh boy, that's a whole can of worms.
Well, let's open it.
I've said for a long time, Georgianne, that this post-war Nazi international is real.
Yeah, you have.
And I have said for a long time, people can call me crazy, I have said for a long time, it's still in existence.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing I've said
We're witnessing it.
We're witnessing it. And the other thing I've said for a long time is you cannot take all of that Nazi science into this country in Operation Paperclip.
Right.
Without a cultural influence that came with it.
Exactly.
And I think, to a certain extent, this is the unexamined component of why our culture increasingly looks fascist.
Yeah.
In its irrationality, in its willingness to go to geopolitical brinksmanship as a tool of diplomacy.
And kill innocent citizens.
And kill,
the police are...
But the thing that I think is going on is, I go back to things that you and I talked about during the bailout period, and that is that the Western elite, to me, is showing the signs of some sort of pressure or panic coming from somewhere, number one. And number two, it's showing signs of factional infighting going on in a major way.
Yeah.
And if we look at recent American moves in the geopolitical chess game, those moves, if you step back from the picture and look at, the wide-angle lens view of it, what appears to me to be going on is that the United States is attempting to nail down the continued alliance with Western Europe, and particularly, Great Britain and France and Italy and Germany, the big four.
Yeah.
And by the same token, attempting to do the same thing with Japan.
Oh, boy.
All right? And I go back to the fact that the Japanese, a few years back, elected a new government that was making all sorts of noises, like it was trying to bury the hatchet with Beijing and reorient Japanese diplomacy into a more pro-Asian stance.
Yes.
And, we saw what happened to that government. We've got Shinzo Abe in there now, who's, again, to me, kind of a frightening figure. He wants to remilitarize Japan. Oh joy, oh joy. Hey, a remilitarized Japan is okay if they're our ally, but yeah, and I remind people, Japan was our ally in World War I.
Yeah. Oh boy.
So, things can change, folks.
Boy, that's the truth.
Yeah, so that's kind of the way it looks to me. I still think there's an aspect to all of this that the financial analysts and the geopolitical analysts, and certainly hacks from South Dakota like me, are missing. I'm still getting the feeling that we haven't quite put our finger on what it is that has these people so desperate. They're showing the signs of desperation, to be sure.
Yes, that's true.
But I don't think any of the scenarios that I've outlined fully encompass everything yet. There's a missing factor, and I don't know exactly what it is. But the other problem is that the old guard here is itself showing signs of fracture. Kissinger, for example, came out and with an article that I blogged about that he himself just said, no, Russia's not behind all this stuff going on right now, and we ought to be very careful on how we portray Putin and deal with him.
Yes.
And it was a way of distancing himself from the policy that's going on in the Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
So, I suspect that this last Bilderberger meeting in Copenhagen was a rather stormy affair. I suspect that the European component was very firm with the American counterparts about what was going on and not doing too much. Again, the key in all of this is going to be to see how Moscow and Berlin handle it. Those are the other two major players, and I'm more hopeful of rationality coming out of Moscow than Berlin.
Yeah, for obvious reasons.
My how the times have changed.
Yeah. Well, I think Putin. I like Putin. I do. I like him
lots of people do.
A whole lot better than what we got over here.
Well, you have to understand, he's not popular in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
You know, they do perceive him as intent on restoring Russian influence in the region. And again, the history is there. You know, they've been dealing in that region of the world. They've been dealing for most of their history either with Russia or back in the day Austria-Hungary or Germany. And, you know, it's not that long ago in history that Russia and Austria and Germany said, well, let's sit down and carve up Poland, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. So, you know, those people have a history, and they know their history, and we have to understand that. So, it's Putin. The problem with Putin is Eastern Europeans see him as nothing but a holdover communist thug, which I don't think he is.
No, I don't either.
He's portrayed that way to Americans, and most Americans think of him that way.
Well, most Americans are ignorant.
Well, this is also true. It's because they listen to Fox News, and CNN, and Chris Matthews, and Sean Hannity, and all these other people.
Yeah.
No, I don't view Putin that way at all. But one thing Putin is, and people have to understand this, Putin is a Russian nationalist statesman. That's what he is.
Yes.
I view him as more of a throwback to the 19th century than to anything from the communists in the way I read him.
Yeah.
And that means he's going to play, you know, he's going to play realpolitik with all the gusto he can, using Russian financial and economic and military power to the full, and he will. What people don't really like about Putin is he's just not willing to play the script that's dictated to him from London and Washington all the time. That's the problem.
Well, that's the same reason they don't like Assad, and the same reason they don't like the Iran. You know, these countries are independent of the U.S. thumb.
Yeah, ultimately, you know, the only thing that we're doing is I've called it Cold War Act 2. You know, we're watching the emergence of a big bloc. The problem is this bloc is going to be a lot bigger if we're not careful.
Yeah.
Because Argentina has now signaled its willingness to enter the BRICS group.
Yes.
Now, you know, I'm sitting here just kind of dumbfounded. You know, we've already kind of lost Brazil, which is the premier Latin American power, and if Argentina goes, that's the other one.
Yep.
You know,
that's right.
How to lose friends, you know.
And if those two go, whole lot of other South American countries.
Well, you know,
Argentina,
the problem with Argentina is that Argentina, unlike Brazil speaks Portuguese, you know, so it's kind of odd man out in Latin America. Argentina is the premier Spanish-speaking power in this hemisphere. You know, they provide enormous amounts of energy to other Spanish-speaking countries, all the way up to Mexico. Yes. So, you know, Argentina goes, then that's going to exert an influence, like it or not. You know, Argentina is the big boy. So that's going to exert an influence on Uruguay and Paraguay and Bolivia and Chile, you know, all of its neighbors. And talk about, you know, this is what I can't understand. Washington's moves here are just geopolitically insane. Yeah. You know, this is what I can't, you know, I'm thinking like a geopolitician here, hack from South Dakota that I am. And if I were in the State Department, I'd be trying to sound alarm bells. Are you people crazy? Yeah. Yeah. Do you really want to create a power bloc consisting of Russia, China, India, Brazil, Argentina, and South Africa?
That's right. And that is what they are doing.
No, I know.
Gee, many Christmas. I'm telling you, there's something about Washington, D.C. I'm telling you.
Well, they're eating their own GMO food and
fluoridated
Joseph, water.
I'll tell you what. I'll be glad to email the coordinates to Washington, D.C., to Putin, and with the blessings of the American
he
people.
He already knows them.
I know he does, but with the blessings of the American people, you know. I mean...
Well, you know, I'm still enough of an American. I'd rather see us elect all these people to the Russian State Duma. You know?
Oh...
Yeah, you know, let Mr. Boehner go and be Speaker of the lower house of the Russian Duma. You know?
None of them would survive.
Take Senator Reid with him. You know?
Yeah, and Kerry.
And Kerry, you know, take the whole lot over to Moscow. Let them run that country. Please quit running ours.
Yeah.
You know, Georgianne, this is what mystifies me. The foreign policy is creating such backlash against the American geopolitical position. This is what alarms me.
Yeah.
This is what alarms me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've built up decades of ill will in Central and South America with, you know, our covert ops and overthrowing Allende and all of the stuff that we've done down there.
Yes. We've done some filthy, vicious things.
You know, Guatemala and Anastasio Somoza and Nicaragua and all of this stuff. You know, and we're getting the blowback. But, you know, losing Brazil and Argentina... If Argentina aligns itself with that block of nations, you know, you know, Brazil is not a technologically backward country.
Right.
Neither is Argentina.
Right.
Like I said, these are the big boys on the block in Latin America, and it's just totally nuts.
Well.
You know, Georgianne, turn the clock back. If this was happening during the presidencies of Dwight Eisenhower or John F. Kennedy, if this kind of insanity was evident during those presidencies, administrations, they would have pitched a hissy fit at this kind of foreign policy.
You betcha. You betcha.
I mean, even Dwight Eisenhower might have managed to work up an emotional, passionate response.
Yeah.
You know? Oh, gosh. And Kennedy certainly would have.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm looking at this, and I have to be honest, I'm just mystified at the insanity, at the galloping geopolitical insanity.
Yeah.
Of it. We are losing friends fast. I mean, Georgianne, former Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser in Australia came out recently in a book and said, you know, this military alliance with the United States isn't working. We ought to rethink it.
Yes, I know.
And came out and basically said, you know, China is not a military threat to Australia.
Right.
And even if China were a military threat to Australia, Britain alone, you know, is a thermonuclear power, and they're not going to let China do anything with part of the Commonwealth, you know.
Yeah.
So forget, you know, it's just, and, you know, again, Prime Minister Fraser was one of our allies.
Mm-hmm.
So we've managed to turn a former Australian Prime Minister.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I'm breathless at this. I'm just
You're not kidding.
Breathless.
You're not kidding. Oh, yeah, Joseph. Either they're taking too much Prozac, or they're ignorant, or they want the United States to be fascist, and they want to make their new world order a fascist Zionist Bolshevik order.
I mean, they've been trying that for years, and that's the thing that, in a certain sense, may be coming unraveled. There are other indicators that it isn't, but you know, I don't know. The geopolitics of this just doesn't have me.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. you don't want to make enemies out of Russia and China and India and Australia and Brazil and Argentina.
Well, suppose, just hypothetically, that they want some country to nuke this country. Suppose that is what is buried in their strategy.
Well, I have difficulty thinking that even if it were buried in their strategy,
that they're that evil, you mean? You have difficulty with that level of evil of these people?
No, I don't have difficulty with that level of evil with these people, but I don't even credit them with that much sanity to be that evil. In other words, if that kind of evil occurs, it's because they're nuts, rather than they're evilly scheming. In other words, they're far beyond evil. They're just nuts.
Yeah, well.
But the problem with that scenario is, I don't see any indicator that Russia would have any interest in playing that game.
No,
I don't see. There's a certain segment of the Chinese government that may be that nuts, but most of it isn't. And those are the only two powers that they could possibly fasten the blame on. I just don't know. I don't see that as a workable hypothesis, especially in the current climate. Too many people are too alive to the false flag games now for that to, it's and if something like that were to happen, we'd lose Western Europe instantly.
Yes.
The Italians, the Spanish, the French, the Germans, the British, they're not going to play that game. They just won't. So no, but again, we've seen a level of insanity with the geopolitics thus far that boggles my mind.
Mine too. Boy.
Just,
I know. Joseph. It really is a form of insanity that comes from arrogance.
Yes, bingo. That's it right there. They are so convinced of the ability, of the superiority of their institutions, their financial arrangements, and their military technology. It's a form of arrogance that no longer looks at military realities, and that's what I find the most frightening about it.
Oh boy!
Because the assumption here is we've got all these bright, shiny toys and nice military technological capabilities, and we've even got secret ones. Ha ha ha! Well, the problem is, of course, Russia doesn't go parading its super secret technology.
Right.
China doesn't go parading its super secret technology.
Right.
They give us a little demonstration every now and then just to remind us, hey guys, don't think you're the only ones with some secret stuff. But
like what
for the most part, they're like what they did with the Donald Cook.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're just much more. Pardon me. Much more discreet about these things. So, it's totally nuts, Georgianne. It's just totally nuts. There's been this regime of unreality, geopolitical unreality, since 9/11. It's just. And I'm hoping there's some sane strategic voices in the State Department and Pentagon.
Well, people are resigning by the droves, Joseph. People
I know they
are leaving.
Well, for former Secretary of State Kissinger to come out and make his little article, kind of calling into question this whole Ukrainian paint Russia into a corner situation. For him to do that, that means he's getting a little concerned.
Oh yeah.
He's the problem here is he's a big Rockefeller man, but so is Zbigniew Brzezinski, and so that means there's a big fracture right in that nexus of power.
Wow. Because
one is pushing and prodding and send weapons and all that, and the other's saying no, don't do that, and they're both connected with that financial interest. So there's your infighting right there.
What do you think is going to happen with our economy? I mean, do you think they're going to devalue the dollar? We take $1 to the bank, they give us 50 cents. I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's wise for people to get their hands on some silver?
Hon, I'm not in the financial advice business. I'm not. May we pause so that I can take just a little break and make a cigarette, because this is an important question.
Okay.
And we need to spend a little time with it. All
okay.
right? Can we pause just briefly?
Yes, we're going to pause. Okay, we're back.
The finances, Georgianne.
I know it's not your business to be an advisor. I'm not asking you that in that capacity, Joseph. I'm asking you just personal, how you feel.
How do I think about all this? Well, how I think and how I feel are two different things. I feel the same angst that everybody else feels.
Yes.
What I think, I've become increasingly interested in the financial aspects of all of this. And I'm unusual in that I'm very skeptical of all of those people out there that are pushing bullion of one form or another. And their arguments are the typical arguments that bullion represents a store and stable store of value. And my problem is, you look at, I just wrote Financial Vipers of Venice, for crying out loud, and I point out in there that Venice's ability at that time in history of being the central bullion market for Europe gave it an ability to manipulate the gold to silver ratio. And that ability they used to their benefit and did immense damage to their rival in Florence. So, bullion is like any other commodity. It's a manipulable commodity.
Yes.
And we've seen the LIBOR manipulations. We've seen the London gold fixing manipulations and banks withdrawing from that arrangement. So bullion is like any other commodity. It can be manipulated by people with the money and power to do so. And I fear, quite honestly, I had a gentleman comment on my Facebook page. I forget what his name was. I probably shouldn't mention it anyway, even if I did remember. But this gentleman made a comment about this precise point and pointed out that, this could be all part of a huge pump and dump scheme.
Yes.
Pump up the bullion and then suddenly flood the market with vast amounts of the stuff and crash the price and walk away with fat profits.
Yeah.
And since I'm one of those that believes that the figures of bullion may be off by as much as an order of magnitude, that's a possibility. My real problem, Georgianne, with all of the financial analysts out there that I've heard, with the exception of Secretary Fitz, is that none of them ultimately seem to know what's going on. Some of them even admit that they think the bankers don't really know how to resolve this.
Yeah.
And they're all looking at this whole financial picture from a conventional viewpoint, in that they are not factoring into their thinking certain crucial elements of reserve currency status, number one, and they are, secondly, not factoring into their thinking what evidence exists for a huge, off-the-books, hidden system of finance, like I've been saying, exists and has existed since World War II, which has been based upon all of that plundered Axis loot, which has been based upon a huge underground market in drugs.
Yeah.
These are all parts of this hidden system of finance. And I have maintained consistently since the earliest time that these bearer bond scandal stories broke that this is a part of this system, that this is not being factored into people's financial thinking. They're too willing to buy the explanations of the government that these things are counterfeit. There's no reality to this whatsoever. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you, you don't take the time to counterfeit bonds in denominations that most people couldn't even begin to discount.
Yeah.
At 100%, at a penny on the dollar and deal with.
Yes.
You don't take the time to counterfeit the strong boxes that they came in, and you don't take the time to document or counterfeit the documents of their authenticity if those things didn't exist. You don't, in other words, counterfeit a $7 bill. So even if these things are counterfeits, they're indicators of a level or tier of finance that most of the public and most of the financial world does not even know exists.
Yes.
Okay? So if that's true, if there's even a prima facie case to be made, to ignore this in your financial analyses is, as Secretary Fitz points out, it's a material omission. It's such a huge material omission that any analysis that you do is absolutely flawed and skewed from the outset.
Wow.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, if there is even an indicator, the slightest chance, that there is a vast amount of gold in existence that's not even recognized, then that too should be a part of your thinking. So in other words, my problem here with these financial analysts on the second count is they're not taking into account the history of this whole financial system since the end of World War II with respect to this hidden system of finance. Now let's look at the first problem, the components of reserve currency status. They're looking at all of this, and they're seeing, rightfully so, they're seeing all of these derivatives on the books. They're seeing, derivatives in such amounts that exceed by several times the entire gross domestic product of the planet.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And because of this, and they're also seeing all of this quantitative easing that's been going on since the bailouts, the printing of money. And for the past, ever since the bailouts, they've been making these predictions. Really, if you've been tracking these things long before that, they've been predicting the collapse of the dollar and hyperinflation such as would make the Weimar Republic or Zimbabwe look like kindergarten.
Yeah.
And they've been making these predictions for years. And in many cases, they've been making these predictions, well, it's going to happen next year.
Yeah, I know.
And it's become like the rapture.
Yeah.
The predictions have been made, but the hyperinflation hasn't shown up. Now, any rational person making these predictions, when they don't occur, they would go back and check their premises and say, well, there's something I missed then. But they're not doing that.
Yeah.
So my question is, why aren't they doing that? Are they part of the system? Or are they so conventional in their thinking that they can't figure out that there may be something they're missing in their financial analysis? And that's my problem here. I think all of the stuff you're hearing is based on an ordinary sort of financial analysis that's not considering these factors. What is reserve currency status based on? Well, it's based ultimately on military and naval power.
Yeah.
because clearing, international financial clearing, represents international commerce. To have international commerce, you've got to be able to move goods from one place to another securely. To do that, you need naval power. All right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's just no way, if you look at the naval power of the United States, there's no way anyone else comes even near it. Okay?
Oh boy.
It's just not there, okay? The second problem is that in today's market, international clearing is largely electronic and space-based.
Yes.
In other words, transactions between the United States and Europe or between Australia and India are going to go via satellite. So in other words, your reserve currency status depends on your ability to clear internationally and financially, and that depends on satellites, assets, and who controls most of the international space satellite assets.
Yeah.
The United States.
Yeah.
And again, no one else is coming anywhere close to the amount of assets up there that we have, all right? Mm-hmm. And I would aver that since we have those assets up there, and since so much of the international financial order depends on them, that the ability to protect them has to be up there as well.
Oh boy. Yikes.
In other words, you cannot have the commercialization of space without its militarization and weaponization.
Oh,
this is just the reality of finance and geopolitics.
Oh.
So no, I'm not in that camp that thinks we're in for imminent collapse. In fact, you should interview Secretary Fitz and what she thinks is going on with iPods.
Oh, boy.
And it'll blow your mind.
Oh, my God.
I'm not even going to steal her thunder here.
Okay.
She told me this, and my jaw just hit the floor.
Oh, my gosh. Gosh.
So, I don't think we're anywhere near all of these dire things happening. I don't think it's a good financial picture either. My biggest question, Georgianne, in all of this is, okay, we've got all of this quantitative easing, we've got quadrillions of dollars of derivatives on the book, and it's not showing up in the form of hyperinflation, and it should have long ago.
Yeah.
So what is going on?
Yeah.
Well, I suspect, firstly, what's going on is that a lot of that paper, quite frankly, is just being shredded.
Oh, my God.
It's just being totally taken off the books. I think, in a certain sense, we're watching the reset button has been pushed, and they're just quietly resetting everything.
Oh.
Okay? That's one scenario. That's one hypothesis. The other component of this is this vast amount of liquidity has to be going somewhere. And I have to call me woo-woo here again, call me wearing the tinfoil hat here again. But with all of the talk of space collateralization and commercialization and going out there and hauling an asteroid to the moon and mining it and all of this stuff that we're hearing, again, I'm of the opinion that you don't start hearing of something until after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Good point.
So I tend to think a lot of this stuff may be going, if we have a hidden system of finance, that means we have hidden parts of the economy. And some of those hidden parts of the economy may not even be on this planet.
Aha.
Aha.
Oh, brother.
Okay. Why? There's a story that came out, just ask yourself this. There's a story that came out that NASA released earlier this week. They with MIT, were successful in transmitting an internet data stream, I think of about 19 megabytes per second or something like this, to the moon.
Oh. Well, somebody had to be up there to receive it.
Well, that was my first thought. And okay, now why do we need the internet on the moon?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the idea of transmitting lots of data real fast and keeping it stable and secure over that long of a distance is kind of a nifty idea to have around if you're really planning to be in outer space in a major way.
Yeah.
not just transmitting pictures of a rock from Mars back to California. Okay?
Right.
No, you want to be able to play your Facebook games on Mars.
Oh my
or
God.
the moon.
Gee.
So when that came out, I thought, okay, ha, ding, ding, ding. Okay, there's another little clue.
Joseph. Oh.
So, I don't rule out, I'm one of these people willing to think outside the box, as you know, but I don't rule out the fact that we might not be seeing all this hyperinflation because the liquidity literally went off planet.
Oh my gosh. Gosh.
Well, if we've got colonies on the moon and Mars, like you say, we got to pay those people.
Yeah, but where would they go shop?
That's the other problem. They've got to be supplied. They've got to be able to buy things. They've got to be able to move around. They've got to be able to deposit their paycheck so that family or relatives back here can go to the Walmart or, the lunar branch thereof.
Oh my God.
So, I'm going way out on, the limb here to make the point. And the point is that this is the only other explanation I can come up with. They're either shredding lots of paper, which I think they are, and pressing the reset button, and that part of this may not even, this liquidity may not even be on this planet.
Oh.
And consider all the little implications of that.
Oh my gosh. Oh, Joseph, this is getting spookier and spookier.
Oh, I know it is. I grant, people, you don't need to write me and tell me, okay, Farrell, you've lost it, you're out there, this is insanity. I know how insane it sounds, but I'm willing to throw any idea out there.
Yeah.
Because my problem here is like my problem with the Malaysia Flight 370.
Yeah.
My problem here is that the conventional financial analysts have been saying these things for so long, and they haven't changed their tune in spite of the fact their predictions haven't shown up yet.
Yeah.
So it's like if the prediction does eventually show up, they can point and say, aha, see, we told you, we just missed the date a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
well, that's not my point. My point is the conventional financial analysis cannot work so long as you exclude things that are material to your analysis. Things like hidden systems of finance put into place by President Truman in 1947 using Axis loot and kept top secret.
Oh,
okay?
brother.
That's point number one.
Point number one, yes.
That's point number one. Point number two, you can't steal Chiang Kai-shek's gold and give a bunch of Chinese gold-backed bearer bonds that have little errors on them, which you can later denounce as counterfeit, and not have a few Chinese kind of mad about it. Okay?
Yeah. Oh, gee. Oh, my
so
God.
little things like this should enter into the picture, but the problem is most of the financial analysts out there, if they do know about these things, and most of them don't, dismiss them.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't willing to take them seriously, and I think that's part of the problem. But the sad fact of the matter is 99% of them don't even know about all this stuff.
Right.
And therefore, their analysis is not going to be able to make sense out of a picture that, if it doesn't incorporate these things, makes no sense.
Yeah.
And what was that hidden system of finance set up to do? Well, let's look. It was set up to fund covert operations to contain the communist bloc. Okay. But that doesn't account for all the trillions of dollars awash in it. You don't need trillions of dollars to fund your covert operations in the Ukraine. So what's the rest of it used for? Well, in my opinion, it went to funding the very expensive secret technologies that they had to develop in response to the UFO.
Oh,
and
boy.
if you're saying that, then where does that put you? Well, it puts you in outer space, doesn't it? Kind of, sort of.
Kind of, sort of. Yes, it does. Oh, my God. Oh, Joseph. Oh.
So yeah, this is a huge picture. I grant you, this is big stuff. I could be so totally wacky out there that, the percentage of possibility that this whole scenario is true might be 99-1 against.
Oh my gosh.
I don't deny it. But it's a possibility that I think we have to look at. That's my point here.
Consider it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
So
that was the point I was making in the Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations book with all this.
Mm-hmm.
That was really the point I was trying to make here. This whole financial system was set up to do something and accomplish something very secret.
Yes.
And this is the reason why you have the non-responsiveness in Washington, because the whole purpose, if you stop and consider, it's just like Secretary Fitz has observed on many occasions, the whole purpose of the federal government eventually becomes a financial harvesting scheme for the black budget.
Oh, God. Oh. My gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Let that sink in, folks.
Let that one sink in.
Yeah. Oh,
that explains the non-responsiveness of the government. It explains this mystifying stance of the public space program.
Yeah. Oh.
It explains the involvement of drug trafficking and all of the other stuff. Why? Because if you are going to develop these super secret technologies, then one component of your security apparatus in keeping them secret is being able to have an inexhaustible, non-overseeable source of funding for them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yep. That's true. Mm. Well,
so,
going backward a little bit to the average American person, would it be a good thing if they had some silver, just in case?
Well, hon, again, I don't make financial advice. I really don't. I really don't. My view, personally, has always been, if we enter that kind of economic situation, of economic meltdown, I would think it far more valuable to have a store of food, to have a plot of land to be able to grow food.
Yes.
To have a network of close friends.
Yeah.
If I go to a poor man with a small family to feed, and he's got a little extra food, and I offer him a silver coin, he's probably going to look at me and say, well, what am I going to do with that?
Yeah. I can't eat it, I can't wear it, and I can't spend it.
I can't eat it, I can't wear it. That's kind of my thinking about it.
Okay.
But that's for every individual to make their own assessment and response to. I have no, my wild scenario is so wild that it literally turns most financial analysis on its head.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I'm not enough of an economist or familiar enough with banking and finance and all of that to even begin to try and give any sort of personal advice on that score.
Well, in the very beginning, when these guys first came to this planet, whoever they were, we're told that they wanted to make people to mine gold. And that
that's Sitchin's scenario. We're not told that. That's Sitchin's reading of the scenario.
Yes.
I have, as I've stated many times, I have many problems with Sitchin's scenario.
Okay.
Because some aspects of it are just kind of loopy. In his scenario, it's because they needed to sprinkle gold particles in the atmosphere of the planet near Nibiru, which comes careening through the solar system once every 3,160 years. From a southern, it's not coplanar in its orbit, and it just gets so nutty. Sometimes I can think of many things that gold could be used for that would be of more value to some sort of interplanetary extraterrestrial spacefaring species than sprinkling gold particles in its atmosphere.
Yeah.
Electronics for one thing.
Yeah.
Storing radioactive materials for another thing. Gold's very good for it.
Wow.
And then there's the whole monatomic gold story.
Yes.
That in that state, allegedly, it loses mass. Well, if that's the case, then gold is essential for actual propulsion.
Gee, many Christmas.
There's the worth of it. So I'm just not in the Sitchin scenario. I'm just really not.
Okay.
I think he did a valuable service by pointing out things in ancient texts.
Yes.
That made people stop and think.
Yeah.
But that said, I don't think it involves rockets and gold particles in an atmosphere of a planet that comes racing through the solar system once every 3,160 years.
Joseph, you know something? You're precious. You really are. Oh, this has been quite a wild ride tonight.
Oh, yeah, that it has.
Well, my gosh, it's 3:39 here.
Okay. Oh, yeah, we better wrap
in
this
the
up.
morning.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Joseph.
Well, thank you.
And everybody.
Help George Ann with donations.
Oh, yes. And work out that PayPal button on Joseph's site.
Well, work out George Ann's first.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Joseph, thank you so much. And
well, thanks for having me back on, then.
Oh, any time. Believe me. Wow. This has been very interesting. Very interesting. The next one I want to talk about is the things in what reading you can give to some of the strange things in Revelation.
Oh, that's a subject for another night.
Yes, that's what I mean. That should be our next one, because there's some very strange things there, and I'd like to talk about them.
Okay, I'll try and read up on it.
Okay.
All right.
All right. God bless everybody out there that's listening. Please work out the PayPal button on Joseph Farrell's website, the Giza Death Star. So, now you know.
Now work out George Ann's first, folks, please.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you, Joseph.
You're welcome.
And God bless everybody out there that's listening and paying attention. And hello to Australia. Hello to, I'll find it here in a minute, Bangladesh, and various other places on our planet that are listening in South America, Central America, Canada, Russia, China.
You're all over.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your globe now. You've got people in China, Australia, India, Japan, Russia, Europe, Africa, Saudi Arabia. You're all over.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, everybody. God bless you all. Good night.